You know us, we tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We are legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us. We are anonymous.
Some terrible things are happening to our children. They are becoming the marketplace for unscrupulous corporations. They're no longer people. They're no longer youngsters that are going to grow up and become adults.
I'm profoundly interested in wearables. The company, and they started making electronic tattoos. Work with them to advance a tattoo that could be used for authentication. So I'm wearing one here on my arm, and it has an antenna and some sensors embedded in it.
They're markets. Everybody's trying to make a market in our children.
I think the cure is mind reading, and I think we're going to accept that cure.
So you've got your limbic system, your cortex, and the tertiary layer, which is the digital AI extension of you. And that high bandwidth connection is what achieves the types of viruses.
But there's still some fundamental problems that we haven't solved. Like, one of them is the mechanical mismatch between humans and electronics.
His company is working on a way to plug in your brain to a computer chip.
And everyone will wear them because people have shown that they're quite willing to give up privacy for convenience.
Electronics are boxy and rigid, humans are curvy and soft. That's a mechanical mismatch problem.
You want kids buying something? How about ways to kill yourself and why to kill yourself? What is that? That's not the higher human intellect educating us. That's the evil part of human intellect, doing anything to make a buck of children. What about all the junk food? Why are our kids obese? Why are they going to grow up and have heart disease in an early age? Because the adults in our culture are more interested in making money selling them garbage. Why aren't our kids exercising in school as much anymore? Why aren't they doing as much music and dance and other fun things? Not because they want to grow into the kind of human beings that founded this nation, who thought a lot and read and considered life. You got videos that are destructive to human values. You got videos about suicide or movies or whatever. Show it to kids. Kids will buy it.
And we're probably not going to accept it because we're old. Our kids, maybe even our kids' kids are going to be the first people to adopt it, and then it's going to be universal worldwide.
It may be true that 10 to 20-year-olds don't want to wear a watch on their wrist, but you can be sure that they'll be far more interested in wearing an electronic tattoo, if only to piss off their parents.
Essentially, vast numbers of tiny electrodes that are able to read write from your brain. I think that's the best outcome. I hope so. If anybody's got better ideas, I'd love to hear it.
The Drug Administration has approved a new medical device to treat ADHD in children.
It delivers electric pulses to your kid's brain while your kid sleeps.
One of the biggest disasters of all was when the drug companies decided and the government aided and abetted them in turning our children into a market for psychiatric drugs. I know something about this tendency to abuse children. In the 1970s, I stopped through years of reform work, operations on little black children in Mississippi with electrodes hanging out of their heads. It was very hard to get anybody even interested in it. Maybe because it's so terrible. What came in freaked me out. I could not believe the stuff these people were sending to me. What I found that most upset me was that at the University of Mississippi in Jackson, a surgeon named O.J. Handy was operating on little children as young as age 3, 4, and 5 for hyperactivity, aggressivity, difficult behavior. These were institutionalized children. O.J. Andy was inserting multiple electrodes into various portions of these children's brains. He was stimulating them, and then he was burning holes in their heads with the electrodes by heating them up. And he was then studying the children who walked around on the ward with wires dangling out of their heads. And he was the first project I stopped. In the 1990s, many years later, my wife Ginger and I discovered that there was a eugenical program sponsored by multiple agents in the federal government called the Violence Initiative, the Youth Violence Prevention Initiative. They were going to start studying African American kids in the womb to see what made them grow up to be so violent. Not racism, not unemployment. They weren't going to look at that. They weren't going to look at gangs. They weren't going to look at who sells all the drugs to these kids and then gets them selling the drugs as their way to make money. They weren't going to look at anything real. They were going to experiment on these children. And Ginger and I took 4 or 5 years out of our lives. We wrote a book called The War Against Children of Color, and we stopped the program. Do you know they still do electroshock treatment on children, not just adults? About 2 months ago, we finally, with me as a medical expert, had a big victory in court where a judge declared that he was going to let us go to trial because I had developed and shown enough scientific information that shock treatment caused brain damage that this judge decided that he was going to allow a trial on whether an individual had had brain damage from shock treatment. Within a day or two, the company settled. The company made an admission to the FDA that shock treatment causes brain damage and significant memory loss, and we thought, what a victory. And within 2 or 3 days later, a mere 2 or 3 days later, the device people, not vice, but device people at the FDA, for the first time came out and openly approved ECT as safe and effective. So this is a prelude to something that a lot of Americans, not generally physicians or doctors or psychiatrists or government officials, but the public's beginning to realize that our children are drowning in drugs. And we've got probably at least 20% of our boys diagnosed ADHD and on drugs. And the drugs don't work. We know with absolute clarity that the drugs don't help the kids, but they do stunt their growth, give them cardiovascular problems, make them addiction prone. We know all that. Well, now we get to why I'm talking to you. My friend Michael Cornwall, a psychologist in California, sent me a notice that the FDA had approved something new for ADHD in children, that children would now, with a prescription from their doctor, be able to get a little machine that their parents or guardian could put electrodes on their foreheads to stimulate their brains with an electrical current strong enough to affect the functioning of the entire front of the brain, to leave it there all night long for day after day after day.
Battery-powered device offers a non-drug treatment. It's a small electrode patch connected to a battery-powered stimulator.
The Food and Drug Administration has approved a new medical device to treat childhood ADHD.
The Food and Drug Administration has approved a new medical device to treat ADHD in children.
It's something that is first of its kind. It delivers electric pulses to your kid's brain while your kid sleeps.
A small adhesive patch is put onto the forehead and then delivers a low-level electrical pulse to the parts of the brain that cause ADHD symptoms.
It's worn on the forehead, usually overnight, and that triggers branches of the sensory trigeminal nerve. nerve, where they're thought to interact with nearby brain structures that affect hyperactivity. The head of the Brain and Behavior Research Foundation says, while it's not clear how this affects hyperactivity, we do know that behavioral brain circuits are complex.
And by affecting those circuits, sometimes with electrical stimulation, as is the case with this device, we can therefore affect the illness itself.
The device from NeuroSigma was just approved, and it's available by prescription, but it's another tool in the armamentarium.
Now that's a pretty massive intrusion. They even know the various parts of the brain that are being affected, and they claim it relates to ADHD. It actually relates to the entire functioning of the child. The frontal lobes are affected, the limbic system's affected, and then they say, that has to do with ADHD. No, that has to do with being a child, being a human being. It's the whole integrating higher part of the brain is being stimulated. It's kind of a mild electroshock that goes on and on and on. And it bears similarity to a lobotomy because the current's going to go through the same areas that they used to love so much to slice up. The frontal orbital areas, it's right behind the eyes, it's right where the lobotomists used to like to go in and damage the human brain.
The very choice of name for this brain interface technology that's supposed to be a psychiatric treatment for ADHD and useful for many applications, the very name of this product is astounding because the butterfly has long been a symbol of the human soul and its transitory life from physical human form into an immortal form where there's no body containing it. Ancient Greek mythology, the talks of Plato, the work of Ovid and the Metamorphosis, all of these encompass aspects of the myth of Psyche, who married Cupid, who was made immortal by Zeus. And this figure Psyche herself is a representation of the human soul personified, but is also symbolized by the butterfly, because the butterfly starts in a pupal stage as a crawling worm. It goes through the chrysalis stage, where it's effectively dormant, dead in a certain sense inside the chrysalis, and then it's reborn into a creature with wings that could fly freely. And for the ancient Greeks and other ancient philosophers, this was representative of the human soul. And it's also been a symbol of mind control in the more recent times. Although it remains in the foray of rumor, the idea of Project Monarch carries a heavy symbolic weight and reflects the very real documented efforts of dabbling in mind control and reprogramming the brain.
In the 1970s, the public was confronted for the first time with the fact that the Central Intelligence Agency had carried out a bizarre series of behavior modification and mind control experiments on unwitting citizens in what CIA Director Alan Dulles referred to as the battle for the minds of men.
The first thing that needs to be said is it's an experimental procedure.
We see here the possibility for direct physical manipulation of the mind.
We know that efforts took place, we just don't know if they used the name Monarch. But if they did use that name, it would have been very meaningful and perhaps poignant and just eerily creepy as to what they're talking about being able to do, to transform the mind in a certain sense, to create a new type of human, to be able to program people according to someone else's will.
Delgado has remote control of the animal.
The electrical stimulator in the skull responds to radio stimulation. The bull becomes non-aggressive.
Was it tamper or blind?
Aggression can be evoked or inhibited.
So with that as a background, it's very creepy that this company, NeuroSigma, used the name Monarch for their brain interface device that's to be used with children who are struggling with certain types of conditions and disabilities. It's very creepy because the actual name NeuroSigma itself is a species of butterfly, and of course it's a play upon words, with neuro referring to the science of the brain. It's just really astounding and kind of a slap in the face.
Now, this is a pretty dramatic thing to do to children. It's never been approved for the treatment of a brain. If you look at other instruments that are putting electricity through your muscles or something, they They tell you, don't do this to your brain. Don't put it on your head. Because see, the brain is the highest evolutionary achievement on Earth and maybe in the universe, the human brain. We don't know how it works. We don't have any Einstein to tell us about it. It's too complicated. We barely have, we don't even have a Newton. We don't have any great neuroscientist to tell us how it's working. It's far more mystery than a known area. We talk about the surface of the sea versus the deep sea. Our knowledge of the brain is beyond metaphor, how small it is compared to the complexity of the brain. After all, you wouldn't be listening, I wouldn't be speaking. None of this could go on without the most complicated organ in the universe being active. Just couldn't happen.
Almost as much data as in the entirety of human history leading up to that.
You guys describe this as the nervous system for the planet. What do you mean?
Well, a lot of us think that all of us with our smartphones and our Google searches and all the things we're doing in the course of our day, that we're watching this sort of growth of a planetary brain. Imagine if you touched your finger to the stove, but you didn't know you'd burnt it for a week. Yeah. Now we have this real-time feedback loop that the human race has never had before.
If you're looking at the world of data, you're looking at the world of information. That's almost everything that isn't physical. The industrial world is the physical world, the data world is everything else.
And it affects every one of us every day. We're all being predicted.
Do you think people understand how much of our lives are being collected? What else do we not know?
We're now collecting exabytes and petabytes of data, and we're looking through that data set using incredibly powerful algorithms to see what we would never see before. Every powerful tool has a dark side, every last one.
I think that McKinsey report also said that the Internet of Things will be a market that was bigger than the entire economy of the world.
But it's fair to ask companies, as they build out the Internet of Things, to not be creepy.
The Internet of Things is referring to this, all these gadgets.
Everything being connected.
Yeah.
Most people don't have any understanding of the scope of this stuff. Now, my background's in IT, specifically IT security. But as an example, it turns out in the US, just to give you an example, and only 14% of people understand that their web surfing history is being tracked. Now, for me, that's a little bit like discovering that 86% of the United States population still believe in the Easter Bunny. It's a little terrifying because it means that the conversations we're having here today put us all in an extraordinarily elite group in understanding the potential damages. Most people just don't know.
We are now more surveilled than we have ever been. Cities are covered in CCTV cameras. Authorities are gathering data on its citizens. It would be all too easy to confuse the real world with a sci-fi dystopia.
And I wonder, with big data, everything is becoming more and more targeted because you have more and more information about consumers.
I think that's exactly right. I think that what we're seeing today is that we can use predictive analytics to know a lot about the people that we're targeting.
In the movie Minority Reports, the pre-crimes unit race to arrest would-be offenders before they have a chance to commit their crimes. Now, they use psychics, but it turns out something similar is being attempted using big data.
The Vancouver Police Department is the first police agency in Canada to implement predictive policing technology.
And that information can turn a city into a digital world, allowing officers to essentially predict crime.
Okay, Jad, what's coming? Double homicide, one male, one female, killer's male.
But some of this technology is proving to be controversial, especially this. It's called the Strategic Subjects List. Where HunchLab is concerned with predicting crimes and locations, this list is concerned with predicting crimes and individual people.
Well, interestingly, earlier this week I spoke to DJ Patil. Now, until recently, he was President Obama's chief data scientist. I asked him about this. This is what he said.
I have many deep concerns about the process of these things. The fundamental one is the transparency of the algorithm.
And so what was interesting is that, of course, when we are looking more specifically at automation and algorithms and the questions around it, of course there are many difficulties in identifying how, in many different cases where automation and algorithms are actually used and take place. And one of the most frustrating things I found during the course of preparing this study that will hopefully come out sometime this year and for which I'm the rapporteur, the fact of automation is very frequently, in my experience, lied about or is not acknowledged, the amount of automation and the amount of automated decision making that takes place within society. And so one of the things that we found is that we're surrounded by quasi-automated decision-making, situations like the one that I'm mentioning, where the decisions are basically made by computers, but by current legal standards wouldn't be considered as such, because somewhere at some small process there is a human being in the loop. So we can pretend to ourselves that everything's okay, we're not surrounded by automation, and the world is a wonderful place. Now, of course, that's not true. When you start looking at these things in greater detail, you realize there's no reason to justify that. Yet still, this is an issue that we increasingly face, both defining the scope and the size of what we're going to be looking at. Because I think you need to start acknowledging that automation and automated decision-making procedures are far more prevalent in society than we previously, as scholars, as policymakers, as people within society, been willing to acknowledge.
Yeah. So is any other country to use the predictive technology for this?
We're the first in Canada. There is some predictive technology down in the United States. It's a different system. We've developed our own here in Vancouver that works for our city.
Korean police officers will soon implement AI technology to prevent crimes from happening and automatically track down criminals.
I don't know, they might be approached if they seem suspicious without any kind of good reason. So that would be my concern, is just like creating a culture of surveillance.
Violent crime in Chicago has seen a dramatic increase.
15-year-old male shot in the neck. Those shots fired at her. Shot Tom and this one just coming in. 5 shots fired.
Send me a wagon with a body bag also.
The response from Chicago's police department is a new initiative driven by technology, which aims to predict where crimes are likely to occur.
I think if someone had walked up to you 10 years ago and said, could I plant a little device on you that would tell me who you've spoken to today, what you're curious about, what books you've read, what money you would have spent, you would have said, are you kidding? There's no way in hell I'd let anybody put a device like that on me. And now we line up and sleep in front of the Apple store for 2 days to pay $800 because it's so convenient.
What is your take on the Chinese government publicly ramping up its efforts in AI?
This is a clear directive coming from the top ranks of the Chinese government saying we want to be the global leader in this area.
Alibaba's new store, Tao Cafe, is now open in the eastern Chinese city of Hangzhou. Customers scan a QR code from their phones when they walk out. When they leave, facial recognition technology identifies the customer and their accounts are automatically charged.
The new generation of artificial intelligence technology is rapidly penetrating into all walks of society and transforming every part of the economy.
I think we live in a world now where highly sensitive information are all over the place. They are accessible to a large number of actors without our knowledge or consent. We are surrounded by vulnerable connected devices and networks. And the last point is our interaction, our very intimate lives are increasingly shaped by decisions that are made by inherently opaque artificial intelligence.
The store is part of a new artificial intelligence town in Hangzhou.
We are not going to make a store that everyone is already familiar with. The truth is, the cafe needs to be redefined. Supermarkets need to be redefined.
The next thing is that big data can personalize everything. This I talked a little bit in my last book, but it turns out that it's coming true in lots of ways that I hadn't necessarily expected.
So my son Jesse is 10 years old, and I've been working on this project for the last year and a half, and he often wanders in the kitchen late at night after the kids have gone to bed and I'm sitting there working, and he came in a few months ago and he said, "Dad, every time you're on the phone, you're always saying this thing, big data. What is big data?" And I was thinking, this is like the ultimate challenge. How do you explain? I mean, I'm still trying to understand what it is, and how do you explain to a 10-year-old what big data is? So I was struggling for an analogy. I said, Jesse, imagine if your whole life you've been looking through one eye, and all of a sudden, for the first time in your life, scientists enabled you to open up another eye. So what you're not getting is it's not just more vision, it's not more data, it's a different dimension. You're seeing things that were there, but you couldn't see them before until you had that second perspective. And so, of course, being 10 years old, he said, so, like, could scientists let me open up a third eye and a fourth and 1,000 eyes? Like, if you're 10 years old, 1,000 eyes is so cool. And I said, yeah, actually, that is exactly what's happening. You can take literally 1,000 different sets of data and find patterns in them that we've never been able to perceive before. And it's really like different dimensions. It's actually quite hard to grasp.
Also raises concerns about privacy. Could you be giving up too much of yours with a simple wave of your hand?
To implant chips like these in the hands of volunteers among its workforce.
It is vying to become the first company in the US to microchip employees.
The summit's right out of 1984, but Jamie Yuccas found willing workers in 2017.
Do you think this is the future?
It is the future.
You don't get one side without the other. When there's a new tool, it can be used for good or evil.
You know, what the employees who have signed up say, it's just convenient. You know, the idea is you just wave your hand.
And designed to replace the traditional keypad for opening doors, using the copier, even buying food in the cafeteria.
To be able to purchase it. But what if there was a way that you wouldn't have to do any of that?
It sounds a bit like a plot point in a dystopian novel.
Right.
That whole, I know it's very futuristic, I get it, but I think what's wrong with just taking out your card? But good for them.
I think it's the wave of the future, that we'll all have implanted chips that have our medical records.
The question now is what do we do from here? And the answer, I think, is that we do what we are doing here now. We talk to each other, we try and figure out how to get other people to talk about it, and we try and get society at large to recognize that this is a critical issue. Now there's, I think, a really critical timeline on all of this. Right now, only about 1/3 of the planet is online. So that's us and a few other people.
Releases a chemical called dopamine. That's why when you get a text, it feels good. Right? So, you know, we've all had it where you're feeling a little bit down or feeling a bit lonely, and so you send out 10 texts to 10 friends, you know, hi, 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 hi. Because it feels good when you get a response, right? Right? It's why we count the likes, it's why we go back 10 times to see if my Instagram is growing slower, did I do something wrong? Do they not like me anymore, right? The trauma for young kids to be unfriended, right? Because we know when you get a hit of dopamine, which feels good. It's why we like it, it's why we keep going back to it. Dopamine is the exact same chemical that makes us feel good when we smoke, when we drink, and when we gamble. In other words, it's highly, highly addictive, right? We have age restrictions on smoking, gambling, and alcohol, and we have no age restrictions on social media and cell phones, which is the equivalent of opening up the liquor cabinet and saying to our teenagers, hey, by the way, this adolescence thing, if it gets you down. But that's basically what's happening. That's basically what's happening, right? That's basically what happened. You have an entire generation that has access to an addictive, numbing chemical called dopamine through social media and cell phones as they're going through the high stress of adolescence. Why is this important? Almost every alcoholic discovered alcohol when they were teenagers. When we're very, very young, the only approval we need is the approval of our parents. And as we go through adolescence, we make this transition where we now need the approval of our peers. Very frustrating for our parents, very important for us. It allows us to acculturate outside of our immediate families into the broader tribe, right? It's a highly, highly stressful and anxious period of our lives, and we're supposed to learn to rely on our friends. Some people, quite by accident, discover alcohol and numbing effects of dopamine to help them cope with the stresses and anxieties of adolescence. Unfortunately, that becomes hardwired in their brains, and for the rest of their lives, when they suffer significant stress, they will not turn to a person, they will turn to the bottle. Social stress, financial stress, career stress, that's pretty much the primary reasons why an alcoholic drinks, right? What's happening is because we're allowing unfettered access to these dopamine-producing devices and media, basically it's becoming hardwired, and what we're seeing is as they grow older, too many kids don't know how to form deep, meaningful relationships. Their words, not mine. They will admit that many of their friendships are superficial. They will admit that their friends, that they don't count on their friends, they don't rely on their friends, they have fun with their friends, but they also know that their friends will cancel on them if something better comes along. Deep, meaningful relationships are not there because they never practice the skill set, and worse, they don't have the coping mechanisms to deal with stress. So when significant stress starts to show up in their lives, they're not turning to a person, they're turning to a device, they're turning to social media, they're turning to these things which offer temporary relief. We know, the science is clear, we know that people who spend more time on Facebook suffer higher rates of depression than people who spend less time on Facebook, right? These things balanced. Alcohol is not bad, too much alcohol is bad. Gambling is fun, too much gambling is dangerous, right? There's nothing wrong with social media and cell phones. It's the imbalance, right? If you're sitting at dinner with your friends and you're texting somebody who's not there, that's a problem. That's an addiction. If you're sitting in a meeting with people you're supposed to be listening to and speaking, and you put your phone on the table, face up or face down, I don't care, that sends a subconscious message to the room that you're just not that important to me right now, right? That's what happens. And the fact that you cannot put it away is because you are addicted, right? If you wake up and you check your phone before you say good morning to your girlfriend, boyfriend, or spouse, you have an addiction. And like all addiction, in time, it'll destroy relationships, it'll cost time, and it'll cost money, and it'll make your life worse.
If you have one of these or something like it, take it out and hold it up. I'm predicting pretty close to 100% saturation. Look at that. I'm right. Probably 90% by now. It's the first thing you do in the morning. When you hold up and you wake up, you check your little robot. It's on your body for almost the entire day.
Not only was I interrupted, I also kept on reaching out for my phone, hoping that perhaps there was a notification. And I wasn't doing this consciously. It was exactly like Pavlov's dog, but my bell was my ringtone, and my sugar was that one notification a day you might get that makes you happy. As it turns out, we got so addicted to technology that 9 out of 10 people today experience something called phantom vibrations. This is when you have your phone in your pocket and you thought it vibrated, you pull it out, there is nothing.
Now, if you went back 20 years in time to a coffee shop and you said that was the way a coffee shop was going to look in the future, you'd be out of your mind. People looking at these little pieces of silicon in various sizes, not really communicating with each other, communicating with their little robot buddies. You do know that one of these operating systems for these robot phones in our pocket is actually called Android. Right on the nose, they just define it. It's an Android, it lives with you.
So I wake up in the morning and the first thing I do is check my cell phone. I usually wake up a little bit earlier than I need to so I can have some time to catch up with what happened in the 8 hours that I was asleep. Get dressed for the day and do my hair, brush my teeth, and my cell phone's usually always by my side. I'm always using it, checking while I'm getting ready, checking my phone.
I have my phone in the bathroom and I check the time to make sure I'm not running late. It's surprising to me in the morning if I look on Facebook, if I do, how many people are already updating their status. And a lot of it's ridiculous. Like, I would never say that.
So usually I'll wake up, one or both of the boys will be in my bed with me. I'll check emails for my online business, do my hair, do my makeup. Somewhere during that process, all the boys are awake. So to keep them occupied, I'll usually hand off my phone and let them play so I can keep getting ready.
My wife and I wake up at 6 o'clock every morning. She leaves by 7 o'clock, and by 7:15, I'm getting prepared for what we're going to do that day, whether it's going to be a skiing trip. I'll glance at my phone to see if anything's messages have come that I need to respond to. And I'll check on my iPad more than my cell phone, really, because people will email me. My cell phone doesn't have any ability for email.
We've reported plenty here on the dangers of using your cell phone while driving. Tonight, though, what police here in New York City believe is an eye-opening case of what can happen while simply using your phone as you walk.
According to
Here's
police,
ABC's Ryan Smith.
witnesses say the victim was using her phone at the time of the accident. A friend disputes that, telling ABC News she may have been feeling dizzy and fell onto the tracks. A family member reached by ABC News declined to comment. But as authorities try to piece together what really happened, the case could highlight what police say is a growing danger: texting while walking.
It's a big distraction. Pedestrians aren't watching where they're walking, they're not aware.
According to a national study, the number of mobile phone-related pedestrian injuries has doubled in recent years, even exceeding the number of injuries among drivers using mobile phones. Another study shows just how hard it is to walk in a straight line while focused only on your phone. And for so many of us who claim we can safely do both, our own Juju Chang discovered that might be a stretch.
You were just texting and walking across the street. Do you do that a lot? Sometimes. Do you feel like you're a little distracted when you do it? Definitely.
And as for that woman struck by the subway train tonight, David, she is in the hospital, and they tell us that she's in good condition.
That's the good news here. That she's going to be okay. Ryan, thank you.
The thing that's neat about these things, what people like, is whenever they open it, there's like gifts for them. Like, did I get an email? Did I get it? Did somebody text me? Did somebody this? Blah blah blah. You know, there's that excitement of like, you know, what do I have to open on here? What's exciting? Did I get mail? You know what I mean? Like, there's something kind of exciting about that, and that can be a little bit addicting.
There is a positive, significant link between texting and driving and people who use their phones outside of the car without putting conscious thought into it. So in other words, the technology is becoming somewhat habitualized. It's becoming routinized. It's becoming this kind of taken for granted thing that we just do, that we need, that we expect from one another.
I carry this around all day long and I use it all day. And so I think it's just become so part of our lives that just getting into the car is just an extension of you walking around with it all day. And you're just texting while you're going somewhere else and doing the same thing.
I don't know. I don't know how you'd go about stopping it. I mean, look at the so-called war on drugs. How long has that been going on? And that hasn't really stopped anything, you know? So I don't know, dude.
I don't know. Like, how do you tell people that it's bad and to not do it? People still drink and drive and they know it's bad. Or
I think that our instant gratification, I mean, the cost of stopping the texting and driving would be that we wouldn't be instantly gratified.
I try to use the voice texting because I have that, but it's not the best. And even then, like, I'll talk, but then I look at my phone and 5 words are wrong, so then I have to look to fix the word. So
actually, for a while when I got my iPhone 4S and it had Siri on it, I actually did use it for a while to text, but after a while it just got so annoying that I could just type it faster than she could. Oh, did you mean this? Or did you mean this? Or period? Or blah, blah, blah.
it's not like you can like make it to where a cell phone will turn off as soon as you get in a car or something. I don't know.
I don't know. Well, honestly, I think the laws help a little, as much as I don't really love the idea of like government having to make these choices for us. I think that it does help.
Like if I got pulled over for texting and driving, that would be crazy. And sometimes like when I see cops, I like hurry and put it away.
You know, public awareness campaigns about, you know, in California, they run a lot of don't text and drive, don't talk and drive, those things. I think by and large, those are good. I don't know how you regulate the technology other than that.
But I think the more it gets driven down our throats, the better we get. I mean, you hear it like at least once a day on the radio or TV or whatever, you hear about it, so.
And then you just slow down. Just slow down. It would be great. Like when I moved here, my kids could ride a horse and up to the market. That's what they need to be doing. They just need to be outside and just be a kid.
Help them realize that it's not like the end all be all of like having friends or being happy or whatever. It's just a means to an end, I guess.
Don't get so distracted by things that aren't important. I call it getting caught up in the thick of thin things. Being on a cell phone can be a very thin thing, and to you it's thick, it's important. At times it is, at times it isn't. The problem is we're thinking it's thick every time we use it, and therefore we don't get things in perspective as it should be. And you're distracted from things that maybe are much more important in life.
I don't think we can actually force or shape or change much of this, but what we can do is that we can become literate about these things so that we see them happening, we can point them out to ourselves and to others. So just like that word choice, I mean, people use the word choice, but I would immediately respond to that is that, well, things aren't nearly as much choice as you think, and once you make a choice, you may be choosing an environment which now limits your choices. So that gives you a vocabulary, and once you have vocabulary, you can then see things that you couldn't see otherwise, and then you can decide. A lot of people don't want to have to engage in that decision process.
I don't know, maybe it's just getting older. You know, it's like you don't want to be yelling at windmills. It's like, this is what this generation's doing, and this is where the technology's going, and I'm just an old man who's happy to be able to, you know, sort of keep up. I mean, I think this helps, on some level, it helps guys like me stay more relevant. You know, and get an understanding of the world. And when you can look something up here, when you can have information here, when you can get to a movie, when you can find your kids, when you can do all that here, I think, that's awesome. You know, guy walks off a cliff with a cell phone.
They're all collected in real time.
The Great Hack uses the saga to tell a bigger story.
But for the sake of clarity, let's just put that aside. Think what you may of either or both, because here's what we want you to focus on this night. The true fundamental culprit in all of this.
Remember how technology promised to make us more connected and not less? Actually, I think Facebook in the beginning did that for a lot of people. But that's when Zuckerberg realized he could monetize Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat. They could create algorithms that were designed to individualize us rather than connect us. They studied our own peculiar little habits, and in the process, what they ended up doing is not connecting us, but actually isolating us in a way that we were held captive. For example, the endless notifications that you get on your phone. My daughter was telling me she was on a business trip to Phoenix, and she said my girlfriend and I were sitting at the pool, tanning at the hotel, and we started talking about something that we were interested, a product they were interested in buying. And she says, and then I opened my phone up, an advertisement for that very product popped up. Well, it's not like somebody out there named Bill is listening to your conversation. But there is somebody named William who's written an algorithm.
Who has seen an advertisement that has convinced you that your microphone is listening to your conversations?
Data is the world's most valuable asset, according to the new Netflix documentary, The Great Hack. But we don't know exactly where it all goes.
What we've realized in making this film is that your phone is not listening in on you. But why you feel that is because you have given up so much of your data and you've become a lot more predictable than you think you are.
That just simply cycles through your system. And when it hears certain words or certain products or certain mentions, it grabs it and creates an ad sent directly to you. It's part of this amazing technological world.
And they're not doing it with just Paul and Rick. They're doing it with millions of people around the world. And the more people and the more data that they get, the more money they make. Is that correct, as rudimentary as it may sound?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the profiling gets more and more precise. As we engage with this material, we help them profile us more and more precisely. And as a consequence, the boxes they manage to put us in get smaller and smaller and more valuable. So the advertising space they sell gets more expensive, and essentially they make more money at the end.
Each one of us
are feeling this, are being commoditized and are really fueling this really $1 trillion marketplace, which is taking everything from, you know, your likes, your Google searches, your Google Maps, GPS, to whatever you buy using credit cards.
But what ends up happening is people stop having serious conversations about anything that matters. They may have chats, but they don't have heart-to-hearts. In fact, we are creating a whole generation who's lost the ability to have a conversation. And many times when people are complaining about the level of the volume of the vitriol in our culture, people shouting at each other and being mad and so forth and so on, nobody seems to make the connection that part of that is a generation that's never learned how to verbalize their feelings and express them in an intelligent way. And the only way they know to react is the way they did when they were 2-year-old and they threw a tantrum. And they are emotionally, mentally retarded, if I can use that term. I got scolded last time I did. Because they've never developed. And even the proliferation of profanity is a result of people who don't know how to communicate well enough to use real words. So they try to emphasize whatever they say by blurting out some offensive expletive to make their voice or their feelings or their point of view known. And I have found with so many of these people that if you simply sit down with them and saying, can we talk about you? That something suddenly changes, because these are people who feel like nobody ever listens to them. And there's so many people who live on the edge of something being liked or not liked. The fact that even now, this service that we're listening to, and it's a neat thing to see something like that you can have this great impact, that we can reach around the world through things like Facebook or YouTube or podcasts or websites and all the rest of this stuff, Twitter and so forth. But at the same time, what is beginning to develop is a YouTube subculture of Christians who never darken the door of a church, but their entire spiritual experience is watching it on TV or watching it on the computer or on their phone. And I get it, you know. This is a great thing for them to stay connected, and I see that good, positive side of it, but over time it becomes a substitute for actually engaging other people. We may be more technologically advanced, but as the adage often says, and it's so true, we've never created a weapon we've never used. The reality is we may advance our technology, but eventually the technology becomes the way in which we create more death and destruction rather than less. If you read Marx and you read Engels, they really believe that man had it all in him and we're just being held back by oppressive religious experiences. That religion, he said, was the opiate of the masses. In other words, we look at how horrible our life is and how oppressed it is, and what we do is we just believe in God in the next life, and therefore we ignore what's in front of us. But he says if you can raise the status of man to where all of his needs are met and all his problems are taken care of, then he will just naturally get rid of religion. But it didn't work, so when Lenin came to power, what he did, he says, we'll start by wiping out religion. And what he did is created the gulags, a nation of slaves. And we're forced to admit, as Solomon said, think in mind, here's a man who had the richest man in the world in his day. He had access to every single resource you could possibly want. He never worried about retirement, right? Solomon said, the race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the learned, but time and chance happens to them all. In other words, he said there's kind of a randomness in life. There are no guarantees. There are no certainties. You cannot really control the floodwaters of life when they come in. Life is going to happen to you regardless of how well or unprepared you happen to be. Life is what takes place. Ironically, as that reality crushes our fantasies, we often develop what I would call God-replacing ideologies. The trash bins of history are filled with these ideologies, and it's amazing because they never seem to quite go away. They're just another generation rediscovers them and recycles them and gives them a new label, but it's really kind of the same idea over and over and over again. I mean, whether it's the sensuality of paganism that's on the rise again in our culture, or the mythology of the Greeks and the Romans, or the mysticism of the Babylonians, or even the more modern ideological delusions that really came to the fore in the 20th century. Things like utopianism, that it's possible to create this perfect existence where everybody lives in love and harmony together. Or the idea of evolution, that every day in every way we're getting better and better. So that as we look at the change in culture and society, we attribute that to our upward and onward growth as we evolve into higher and higher.
To launch an investigation, I think they're going to say I've committed grave crimes, I've violated the Espionage Act. They're going to say I've aided our enemies in making them aware of these systems. But that argument can be made against anybody who reveals information that points out mass surveillance systems.
Mass surveillance of Americans for profit? That's what AT&T is doing, according to a report out Tuesday from the Daily Beast. The report digs into the company's Hemisphere program, which was revealed in 2013 when the New York Times reported that AT&T had partnered with the government to help investigate. But the Daily Beast says new documents show it's more than a so-called partnership because AT&T allegedly charges the agencies it works with for access to its data.
NSA. User data. You have 1.1 million users, billion. You have more data than any entity in the world. And it's all of our data, and we care a lot about it, and we don't want people necessarily getting it and then using it to do bad things. What I want to know is what Mark Zuckerberg thinks about these issues and our right to privacy versus the government.
Yeah, so I mean, we take our role really seriously. I think it's my job and our job to protect everyone who uses Facebook and all the information that they share with us. Facebook is an idealistic and optimistic company. For most of our existence, we focused on all of the good that connecting people can do. And as Facebook has grown, people everywhere have gotten a powerful new tool for staying connected to the people they love, for making their voices heard, and for building communities and businesses. But it's clear now that we didn't do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm as well. We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a big mistake. And it was my mistake. and I'm sorry.
What we do not do is spy unlawfully on Americans, or for that matter, spy indiscriminately on the citizens of any country.
The fact is that they've gone into the communications links, picture undersea cables between Google and Yahoo servers. Now, the reason you would do this is because they are overseas, therefore they would fall outside of the oversight of the U.S. government. They could access them without seeking a court approval under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Here's what the NSA said when we went to them today. They said, quote, "The assertion that we collect vast quantities of U.S. persons' data from this type of collection is not true. The NSA applies Attorney General approved processes to protect the privacy of U.S. persons." Now, notice in that statement they say we do not go after U.S. citizens, no mention of foreign citizens, for instance. And earlier today, the NSA chief said we do not go after servers. He does not mention communications links. So in effect, the NSA confirming the essence of the story here.
Now, labeled one of New York City's weirdest and most iconic skyscrapers, 33 Thomas Street has been a source of mystery for many years. Constructed and owned by AT&T, this faceless concrete tower has been linked to the NSA.
This New York City skyscraper is one of the most important assets to the NSA. Known as the AT&T Long Lines building, the 550-foot tall tower has 29 floors with 3 levels and has not one single window in its walls. But for many years, the New York skyscraper located at 33 Thomas Street has been a source of mystery.
I knew the AT&T building because I had worked nearby there for a while, and it always seemed kind of mysterious because there's no windows, and I knew it was all electronics inside.
Formerly known as Project X, an AT&T subsidiary commissioned the tower to house long-distance phone lines. Completed in 1974, it was built to withstand an atomic blast. The architect even made plans to include enough food, water, and generate fuel to sustain 1,500 people for 2 weeks during a catastrophic loss of power.
You know, we had seen a couple floors of racks of electronics, and then all of a sudden we walk by and there's this big space with big, I said, "Are those battery jars?" And he said, "Yeah, that's our backup power."
But now it appears the building served another purpose. Aside from housing landlines, powerful computers, and switchboards, the mysterious building also doubles as a wiretapping facility that targets calls, faxes, and internet traffic, according to an article in The Intercept. The National Security Agency refers to the tower as Titan Point.
Telecom giant AT&T pioneered a data collection program that gathered hundreds of billions of internet records for the National Security Agency. It's called the Fairview program and started back in 2003, according to a report from the New York Times. The NSA said the program was like having a live presence on the global net for data collection. It sent more than 1 million emails a day to the NSA headquarters. The story also claims AT&T began providing 1.1 billion cell phone records a day to the spy agency.
What I discovered in 2003 was that they were tying into the main internet data stream. So these documents confirm that. There's actually a paragraph in there that talks about in September 2003, the NSA went live on the internet because of the installations at AT&T. In late 2002, we heard there was a installation going in at a nearby office, which turned out was an NSA installation because the NSA actually showed up at my office, that they were sweeping up everybody's communications, not just AT&T customers, but anybody and other companies who were not aware of this arrangement back then. They were sweeping up all that stuff without any selection because the apparatus they were using to sweep it up with had no intelligence. It was just a blind sweep of everything, which told me right then and there that was unconstitutional.
A warning tonight, straight out of Minority Report.
How those assorted tank tops work out for you?
From Samsung, your smart TV is watching you.
Go to Smart Hub.
The latest technology that turns your voice into a remote so that you can scan YouTube, choose a movie, or change channels just by speaking can also hear your private conversations.
YouTube.
We gave Samsung's latest model a test.
Once I press this button, everything I say into this device is getting recorded and could be shared with a third party.
It's as cool as it is creepy.
People have this expectation that the conversations that they have in their own home or what they choose to watch, this kind of data is really private.
Samsung's privacy policy telling consumers please be aware that if your spoken words include personal or other information, they will be captured and transmitted to a third party. The company adding that they do this to improve the features of their televisions.
Alexa, do you work for the NSA? Alexa, do you work for the NSA? Okay. Alexa, do you work for the government?
I can't find the answer to the question I heard.
Alexa, do you work for the government? Yes or no?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question I heard.
Alexa, do you work for the government?
Sorry, I can't find the answer to the question I heard.
Alexa, can the CIA get information from Amazon? Alexa, can the CIA get information from Amazon? Alexa, can the CIA get information from Amazon?
We've been telling you for months now about the growing power of the big tech companies whose brand of surveillance capitalism has come to shape our politics and culture in ways that many people don't perceive. We want to give you a very specific example of that. It's both a look into the near future and a terrifying illustration of the control these companies seek over our daily lives. We recently reviewed several patents filed by Google. As we describe them, ask yourself if you're comfortable giving this much power to unelected technocrats you have never met. In the first patent, filed in September of 2016, Google envisions how it could send you personalized advertising based on what a camera observes in your home. In the illustration that Google submitted to the federal government, the Patent Office, a camera in your bedroom sees a Godfather novel on your nightstand next to your bed and uses that to steer you to watching the movie. If you think that's creepy, prepare yourself because it gets a lot creepier. In another patent application from September 2016, Google imagines how it could take control of your parenting, your relationship with your children. Google's smart home system could detect children near a liquor cabinet, for example, or in their parents' bedroom, infer that, quote, mischief is occurring and deliver a verbal warning. In another example, Google imagines a hypothetical child called Benjamin. Google's cameras would be watching Benjamin at all times, carefully. They could see if he's playing outside or using electronics. Presumably, they'd also try to use that information to sell him things at some point, because that's the whole point of Google. The same patent also discusses how the smart home could coach families on, quote, areas of improvement. For example, if a family doesn't spend enough time together, eating together, in Google's estimation, Google might scold them and suggest that they set a goal of eating more often together. That is Google's description, not ours, by the way. We contacted Google for comment on this, and the company, and we're assuming it was a person and not a robot, replied this way, quote, we file patent applications on a variety of ideas that our employees come up with. Some of those ideas later mature into real products or services, some don't. In other words, don't worry, we're not spying on you yet. We just have the patent for it.
A surprising new report suggests that Yahoo spied on its customers' email accounts for the government. Reuters reports the company last year used a secret surveillance program. It allegedly scanned hundreds of millions of Yahoo mail accounts at the request of the National Security Agency, or FBI. The report is based on the accounts of anonymous former Yahoo employees. In a statement to CBS News, the company says this: Yahoo is a law-abiding company and complies with the laws of the United States.
This is a very big deal. It's very intense, it's new, and it's quite surprising. Because what's happened since the Snowden revelations a couple of years ago, Silicon Valley has been contesting most of the government's efforts to spy on it. What appears to have happened last year is the government went to Yahoo and said, hey, we want to spy on all the incoming mail to all Yahoo accounts. Will you build us something that makes it easy to do that?
So they created a special software.
They created special software that would scan every incoming Yahoo message for a certain phrase or keyword. We don't know what the phrase or keyword was, would store those in a special place for the government and did it in real time. That is real active cooperation. That's different and new.
And the question is, what in the world was the government?
I'm now seeing some journalists saying, what is going on? It makes no sense. But actually, It makes perfect sense if you've been tracking those behind this for the last 30 years, as I have. They are clearly not acting alone. And what is happening? We're seeing that very structure being implemented before our eyes. Why? Because it's not random. None of these events are random. They have been coldly calculated and planned for a very long time. This world is manipulated from the shadows by a global web of secret societies interacting with each other with a common leadership and a common goal. And that goal is the complete subjugation and control 24/7 of the entire global population. And this web, this cult as I call it, operates like a transnational corporation. It has a headquarters, in its case it's in the shadows, and it has subsidiaries in every country, operate within their sphere of influence, each country. And their job is to impose on their country the centrally dictated global agenda for total human control. So you have the inner circle of the cult at the top of the pyramid. Then you have the military police state imposing the will of the 1%, the cult, upon the rest of the human family, all over the world. And that imposition of the tiny few over the very many, it's meant to be imposed control via dependency by the human family upon the 1%. And to achieve that dependency, you have to destroy the independent livelihoods and independent employment of the human population. So they become dependent for survival on the cult-controlled governments. But what's the reason for it? Why are they doing what they're doing? It's to create what I call the Hunger Games Society, a global control system that operates within a pyramidal structure. At the top, you've got the inner circle of the cult. Some people call that the 1%. It will do. At the bottom, you have basically the rest of humanity under the control through dependency to survive upon the 1%, the inner circle of the cult. And what is happening? We're seeing that very structure being implemented before our eyes. Why? Because it's not random. None of these events are random. They have been coldly calculated and planned for a very long time. If you are going to create a situation where people are in a situation of dependency to survive upon a tiny few people running through countries and states and governments, their number one necessity, foundation, is to destroy the independent livelihoods of the population through independent businesses and independent employment with those businesses. Because while that independent source of income exists, the few are not going to control the many by dependency. It's to destroy all independent livelihoods and independent employment to make the mass of the world population dependent for survival on the few that control governments. So, what the hell do we do about this? Well, you can try to find a solution to a problem, usually leads to more problems, or we can remove the cause of the problem. And the cause of the problem, what has created all this, is humanity's acquiescence with its own enslavement. Humanity's lack of a backbone. Just stand up and say no. Not having it. Fascists do not impose fascism. There's not enough of them. Fascism is imposed by populations acquiescing to fascism. So people say, what do we do? Well, how about what we don't do? We no longer acquiesce to fascism. And that takes courage, it takes backbone, and it takes unquenchable determination. And we, human family, need that now until it is a tidal wave. There is nothing more important than looking this in the eye and saying, no, not having it. Nothing more important. Oh, what about the kids? Well, okay. So what kind of world are they going to live in? What kind of world do they live in now? What kind of world are they going to live in years, decades from now? Because where we are is where we are, and where we're meant to stay. This is really the time that we need to put aside all the fear and all the anxiety of what will happen if I don't do as I'm told. Well, what will happen if you do as you're told? We are going to end up in a global fascist state beyond anything that Orwell envisaged. And we're standing at that point now. How much longer are people going to ignore it, put their head in the sand, hoping the tornado won't get them? Well, the tornado's coming, and your head's still in the sand. If you lifted it and faced it, you might be able to take avoiding action. But one thing's for sure, if you don't, the tornado's going to have you all spinning in the sky, no matter how you try to hide from it. This is the point in human history that we stand. We have the ability still to turn this around by refusing to cooperate with it. And the choices we make now will decide the future of human society. As far as the eye can see and the mind can imagine, we are here to stop that happening. The door is closing so fast, and when it does, it's going to be seriously difficult to turn around. But there is a way that we can turn this around, but it's going to take total focus, a backbone of steel, and a refusal under any circumstances to cooperate in any way, shape, or form with our own enslavement. It is to put aside religious differences, racial differences, sexuality differences, they're all illusions anyway, and come together as one human family in mutual support to en masse refuse to acquiesce with not only our enslavement, but the even greater tyrannical imposition on our children and grandchildren. There is nothing more important that we can contribute to our children's future than to head off the nightmare that is coming their way. Let us put aside all the fake fault lines that divide us and come together in unified focus and determination by refusing to cooperate with government impositions. Make those impositions impossible to enforce. There are closing in on 8 billion people in this world. You would get them in a single room. That alone shows that we can bring an end to this, but only if we refuse to be divided and ruled down these fault lines of ludicrous, irrelevant, childlike division, and come together in mutual support to focus on what is being planned, indeed is now unfolding by the day, to destroy what's left of human freedom.
It's important to understand what the 5G is doing and what they say it's doing. We're told on the IEEE beamforming document that this technology cooked your eyes like eggs in World War II. And you all all need to understand these are military weapons. These are assault frequencies. If you garner nothing more than that, that's what you need to know. It's microwave radiation warfare, is what this is.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the National Press Club Federal Communications Commission Chairman Tom Wheeler.
It's an honor to be here at the National Press Club. The first generation wireless, 1G, was voice. The second generation, 2G, allowed both talk and text. The third generation, 3G, the internet, in a limited way. And today's technology, 4G, completed that digital migration. But if anyone tells you that they know the details of what 5G is going to become, run the other way.
This video is brought to you by the number 5 and the letter G. And pretty soon, everything else will be too.
I have to tell people 5G is a killer. I'm Mark Steele. Anybody who hasn't heard me, I'm a weapons systems head-up display expert, one of the leading experts in the world. I've actually brought cover in relation to this, and the reason I became an expert was because I invented them. What I'm going to say to you today, do not believe a single word I say. Not one. I want you to do your own research. You'll find it's absolutely terrifying. You got your body cam? Aye. Oh, good lad. Right, because I'm talking to that. This 5G rollout is a weapon system. I've got a letter with central government because I know about weapon systems more than anything other.
In Britain, in a place in the north of England called Gateshead, a scientist there called Mark Steele has been very publicly and actively warning people about the effects of LED streetlights, which he says in Gateshead are emitting now 5G.
Right, what's the crack?
Hey lads, I'm just having a word with these Gateshead council workers about replacing these transmitters on these lights that are causing harm and assaulting the community. This is an existential threat to the economy, to the environment and humanity.
If these transmitters are everywhere, then everyone's at risk, surely.
There's a lot of confusion about what 5G is. The G stands for generation. So you started off with the first transmitter system.
Back in the 1980s.
In the 80s, yeah. So you had 1G, then you had 2G. And as the generations moved on, you started to see more complex signal systems, cleverer pieces of antenna designs, etc., etc. So the whole thing became more data, quicker downloads, etc., etc. However, 5G is something completely different. All right, let's get a breakdown. Let's tell the people what this really is. This is the 5G transmission device. Heck, that's a hell of a beast, that, isn't it? These are the uninsurable transmitters. Just get a good look at that, guys, because obviously I know there's quite a few experts who want to see more detail about the transmitters and the chipsets. Just have a good look, boys. This is the control management system masquerade. There's an antenna there, you see that? What is this phased array antenna here? What's that? This is for phased array, alright? As you'll see, it's got a driver, it's got some chip there. It's one chip. Look at the chipsets on this. This is your dystopian world. What did Gateshead Council say? I'll tell you what, I think we better send some of these educated fools back to school, or just send them to prison. whichever's the easiest. I think prison's probably better. Alright, that's 5G, guys. That's 5G hardware.
You must consider the whole part played by electricity in nature. Human beings cannot go on developing in the same way in an atmosphere permeated on all sides by electric currents and radiations. It has an influence on the whole development of man. This life of men in the midst of electricity, notably radiant electricity, will presently affect them in such a way that they will no longer be able to understand the news which they receive so rapidly. The effect is to damp down their intelligence. Such effects are already seen today. Even today, you can notice how people understand the things that come to them with far greater difficulty than they did a few decades ago. Rudolf Steiner, 1924. Rudolf Steiner noted that in 1924, since then our atmosphere has become far more permeated with electric waves of widely diverse types. There's no doubt now that electric waves, electromagnetic forces, cause direct biological effects. There's thousands of peer-reviewed papers on this subject. There's no doubt about it. But what are these effects? How are they affecting us? What can we do about it? We're now at a stage where we're putting in what's called 5G, which is a special type of broadcast for high-density information transfers. And it turns out that this is the same frequency bands that are used in crowd dispersal weaponry.
5G, first and foremost, is densification. So it's significantly more transmitters at close proximity to a human, and it is also a sophisticated, illegal, unlawful transmitter. What I mean by that is it is a high gain dielectric lens antenna, and what that allows 5G transmitters to do is to 3D map its environment in your home. The 868 megahertz frequency is specific for battlefield interrogation systems, so sub-gigahertz. It allows the signal to travel through concrete brickwork with ease, and it can actually data gather. It is a target acquiring system. Phased array is basically radar off the battlefield. It is extremely good at identifying targets and being able to lock onto targets. And not only that, it can specifically target you as an individual. So any judge sitting on an interesting case, let's say, any lawyer, any barrister, anybody doing any work that is potentially controversial, your life could be at threat. So the antenna design that you currently have on top of these LED streetlights, masquerading as a control management system, is basically battlefield interrogation equipment. The first phased array unit was actually called Mammoth, used by the Germans during the Second World War to identify Allied aircraft. Obviously things have moved on significantly since then.
Well, I joined the Royal Navy in 1960, and I specialised in microwave warfare. Radar, obviously, which uses microwave, but they don't just teach you radar, they teach you all about microwaves and other uses. So I understood about microwave warfare and how it can damage people, how it can harm people. Microwaves then were used as weapons, as they are today. It is a perfect stealth weapon, and when governments don't like a group of people, for instance the ladies who protest at Greenham Common in England about the American missile base they camped, they were microwaved. We microwaved Catholics in Northern Ireland to make them sick. It goes on all over the world. And it's a weapon that you don't know you're being targeted, because the dose is very, very low which is actually more dangerous than a high dose. It's very, very low, and it may take a year or two, but you can cause neurological damage and cancers with low-level microwaves, and you can make all your opponents sick. It's a perfect weapon for a government.
Our impulses are being redirected. We are living in an artificially induced state of consciousness that resembles sleep. Their intention to rule rests with the annihilation of consciousness. We have been lulled into a trance. They have made us indifferent to ourselves, to others. We are focused only on our own gain. Please understand, they are safe as long as they are not discovered. Keep us asleep, keep us selfish, keep us sedated.
Almost immediately, I had neighbours knocking on the door, talking about children bleeding from the nose. I had images posted on Facebook. And one neighbour in particular came to my door and mentioned the fact that since the LED street lighting had been installed, she was bleeding from the nose every single night. I thought it was unbelievable. However, I spoke to another neighbour who lived not far from the first lady who mentioned this, and she also confirmed that since the LED street lighting had been installed, she also had started to develop nosebleeds and had never had nosebleeds before in her life. That then put me on a journey to investigate. I measured microwave radiation levels from the transmitters on top of the LED streetlights. The basic 868 megahertz, it was significantly higher than the current Council of Europe 1815 resolution, which is a maximum of 600 millivolts. I've measured up to over 3,000 millivolts.
5 to 6 times higher than the guidelines.
Significantly higher than the current Council of Europe 1815 resolution, which states that 200 millivolts should be the maximum. The Bioinitiative report states that it should be significantly less than that. So we've got the Council of Europe, that's, you know, the international criminal courts are stating that, you know, the learned judges have said that 200 millivolts, and I'm measuring in bedrooms in Gateshead, minimum 600 and up to 4,000.
Does this mean that in 2020, 2021, when 5G is destined to roll out globally, that you're going to get those kind of readings everywhere all the time?
Everywhere all the time.
Worse than that?
Worse than that.
Yes, 5G will connect the Internet of everything. If something can be connected, it will be connected in a 5G world. Hundreds of billions of microchips connected in products from pill bottles to plant waterers, requiring massive deployment of small cells. We won't wait for the standards. Now, to make this work, the 5G build-out is going to be very infrastructure intensive. We must reject the notion that the 5G future will be the sole provenance of urban areas. The 5G revolution will touch all corners, and that's damn important. The interconnected world of the future will be the result of decisions we must make today.
The main issue before us today is Senate Bill 637 and Senate Bill 894, the former by Senator Hugh and the latter by Senator Knopf. We're going to invite the first 4 witnesses in support of the legislation, and that would be John Jones with Sprint, David Lewis and Andy Emerson with AT&T, Neil Krevda with Verizon, and Frank Iacovetti Jr. with T-Mobile.
So be straight with me. Is it true?
It could be.
No, well, very
no
few cases.
There
was
was
an unfortunate
really
incident out in Iowa. Look, gentlemen, practice these words in front of the mirror. Although we are constantly exploring the subject, currently there is no direct evidence that links cell phone usage to brain cancer.
I'm Sharon Goldberg. I'm an internal medicine physician. I've practiced medicine for 21 years, and my background is mostly academic, internal medicine, hospital-based, clinical research, and medical education.
I'm a certified Microsoft small business specialist. I worked on space station designing the cabling system for the airlock module, where I was responsible for EMI, EMC analysis, which is electromagnetic interference, electromagnetic compatibility.
I am a professor in the Department of Epidemiology, Biostatistics, and Occupational Health, and I teach there both toxicology and health effects of electromagnetic radiation.
My name is Daphne Tachover, and I'm the founder of an organization called We Are the Evidence. We are an organization that represents the many adults and unfortunately many children who have become very sick from wireless technology radiation.
There seems to be a couple false Easter eggs being put out there right now. I want to make sure we dispel that right off the gate.
The effects of wireless on health scientifically are very, very clear.
So it's always pushed back to the definition of an acceptable level of radiation. And that's what this is, by the way. This is about radiation.
Wireless radiation has biological effects, period.
My name is Dr. Angie Kolbeck. I've been reviewing the studies showing the impacts of wireless radiation on our health, and there are now thousands of studies showing the following adverse health impacts to wireless radiation: cancer, oxidative damage, DNA damage, DNA failure.
Things like memory, dizziness, anxiety, brain fog.
Headaches, nosebleeds, cognitive problem, exhaustion.
We have evidence of DNA damage, cardiomyopathy, which is the precursor of congestive heart failure.
Short and long-term memory loss, decreased attention spans, lower reaction times, even involuntary contractions of muscles causing misalignments of spines and jaws.
Breast cancer. We suddenly have breast cancer in women who have no DNA predisposition.
Disrupted immune function and change in stress proteins, reproductive and fertility effects.
There are dozens and dozens of studies that show beyond any doubt what this radiation is doing to our sperm. Now, if you take the cell phone out of your pocket, the sperm will recuperate within 3 to 4 months. What would not recuperate would be the damage to the DNA of the sperm. That is irreparable. The wife of the ex-governor of Indiana was diagnosed with glioblastoma. Same brain tumor Ted Kennedy had and John McCain had. Did you look at John McCain's scar? This is a cell phone brain tumor. LeBron James, one of our sports people, had a salivary gland tumor. That is another cell phone tumor. You didn't hear about it because immediately after that was discovered, he was paid by Samsung to become their spokesperson.
We are seeing increases in brain tumors. We're seeing increases in Alzheimer's. We're seeing increases in all of the neurotransmitter diseases, ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, Parkinson's. These are all disease systems that are known to be associated with low-level energy exposures.
We talk about 24/7, around-the-clock exposure, wherever you are and your whole body. You never get away from it. And it seems from our studies that maybe your immune system can cope with for a time, but it will deteriorate. Then the irradiation will definitely damage cells at a deeper level, and the question is what will then happen?
These are out of peer-reviewed papers, so these are not just hypochondriacs thinking that they're doing it. We're having real problems with this.
This is no longer a subject for debate when you look at PubMed and the peer-reviewed literature. These effects are seen in all life forms: plants, animals, insects, microbes. So 5G is not a conversation about whether or not these biological effects exist. They clearly do.
There is scientifically evidence that is so strong that you can be certain that the standards used by the FCC to manage health effects are wrong.
We need to start measuring how much radiation are people being exposed to before we roll out 5G. There are 4 kinds of electromagnetic fields that we know are harmful to human health. So radio frequency radiation, magnetic fields, dirty electricity, and electric fields, okay? Our exposure, any given person, and all humans are affected by EMFs. What is our exposure in a day? It's not one cell phone. It's cell phones, it's multiple wireless networks, it's smart meters, it's cell towers. It's this sandwich, and it all adds up.
The data we're going to look at are all published science, testing results, or public standards. At the bottom end of the radiation scale of what's called power density or signal strength is the minimum level at which cell phones will work, which was found to be 0.2 billionths of a microwatt per centimeter squared. Pine needles were found to age prematurely at 0.000027. At short-term exposures of 0.05, children aged 8 to 17 experienced headache, irritation, concentration difficulties, and behavioral problems. 0.1 is the biobiology or building biology guideline for extreme concern. 1.0 produced sperm DNA fragmentation and a decrease in sperm viability in vitro. Also at 1.0, the science shows the following bodily effects can occur: headaches, dizziness, fatigue, insomnia, chest pain, difficulty breathing, and indigestion. 2.5 saw altered calcium metabolism in heart muscle cells. 4.0, changes in the hippocampus affecting brain memory and learning. And at 6.0, DNA damage in cells. So, where are smart meters on this list? Electrical Power Institute in December 2010 measured a single Itron smart meter with pulses up to 7.93 microwatts per centimeter squared. Our own testing indicated approximately 8.0 with 1 meter. These tests are at a close distance, approximately 1 foot away from the meter, but an infant's crib could be just as close on the other side of the wall where the meter or bank of meters are installed. Even though there are all these known health effects at levels far lower, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Luxembourg see fit to set the standard at 9.5. And China, Poland, and Russia, 10.0. This is the same level at which behavior has been altered, producing reflexes of avoidance following 30-minute exposures. A room of 12 smart meters, very common and even a conservative number in an apartment building, tested at 19.8 microwatts per centimeter squared. This is hundreds of times higher than levels which clearly indicate harmful effects. So how can utilities and governments get away with forcing these devices on everyone? This is how. In Canada and the US and several other civilized countries, the safety limit is set at 600 to 1,000 microwatts per centimeter squared. This so-called safety limit is literally tens of thousands of times higher than levels which are known to damage health according to peer-reviewed published science.
Faster, better, more reliable internet. That's the promise of 5G technology, but there is also the peril. Health hazards associated with radio frequency that is higher also and requires more transmitters and antennas. And the stark, simple fact is the health hazards are unknown and unstudied. And that is a sign of neglect and disregard on the part of the Federal Communications Commission that seems unacceptable. There have been no answers so far. The FCC basically has said everything's fine, but in order to reach a conclusion about the health and safety of this new technology, we need facts. Mr. Chairman, thank you for having this hearing. 5G, as you well know, also uses higher frequency waves that don't travel as far and will rely on a network of hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of small cell sites. And the question then is, are there any health implications, any public safety implications to those additional sites that are likely to be located close to homes, schools, workplaces, and closer to the ground? Correct?
Correct, Senator. Yes.
So my question for you, particularly Mr. Gillen and Mr. Perry, how much money has the industry committed to supporting additional independent research? I stress independent research. Is that independent research ongoing? Has any been completed? where can consumers look for it, and we're talking about research on the biological effects of this new technology.
Thank you, Senator. I think, thank you for your focus on the issue. Safety is paramount, and as you alluded to, we rely on the expert agencies, we rely on the findings of the FDA and others as to the requirements to keep all of us safe. There are no industry-backed studies, to my knowledge right now. Happy to visit with you as to what opportunities you think there needs to be more studies, and we're always for more science. We also rely on what the scientists tell us.
So essentially, the answer to my question, how much money? Zero.
I can certainly follow up with you, Senator. To my knowledge, there's no active studies being backed by industry today.
Anybody else know of industry commitments to back research, fund it, support it, to ascertain scientifically the health effect?
No, I'm not aware of any.
So there really is no research ongoing. We're kind of flying blind here, so far as health and safety is concerned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're a trained medical professional.
Yes.
We don't have one on the panel. What are we to make with of the American Cancer Society, for example, telling us there's no evidence of harmful product?
Many of these organizations have conflicts of interest.
Very briefly, if you can, what do you mean by conflict of interest?
One of the first things that you teach residents is that you always have to look at the funding.
There's a tremendous amount of sponsored research by people who are hired to do studies to find no effect. And that's plagued this field in a number of countries.
The radio frequency radiation work that we did was supported by Motorola. The relationship was really very cordial and very stress-free, but only up until we started generating data. These folks were very, very upset and began to talk about how are they going to handle this, what sort of spin can we put on this, what can we expect from this, and from that point on the relationship changed. What we saw was that Motorola began to exert more and more control over the work, telling us what to do, telling us how to write abstracts, what to say in the abstracts, what to say in the papers, how to do the work. No, don't do this. Yes, do it this way. This was unacceptable. I had completed our study of DNA damage, and I submitted the final report to Motorola. They simply weren't willing to accept my interpretation of my study, my evaluation of my study, my knowledge of science at that point, and tried to urge me not to publish the study.
Did you hear about people coming to you as far as having complaints about illness?
We were made aware of health complaints following installation of smart meters, and we wanted to verify this using our field work. So I measured the field of about 30 different people while they stood 1 foot in front of the smart meter, and in every single case, the human energy field was obliterated as they stood in front of the smart meter. So in our first slides, what we see is normal cells, and the structure of the cells is intact and sound. This is what we would expect from a normal sample. So after 2 minutes of exposure in front of the smart meter at about 1 foot away, we see a totally different story. Sample 1, you can see a lot of degradation in the cells. The cell walls have been broken, and you see changes in the cells which are called mycoplasma. It shows a mutation to the cell. In the second sample, we see a different type of degradation to the cell membranes. You can see a corrugation here. This is called bottle cap formation, and it's known that this occurs due to oxidation or exposure to free radicals. So this third subject, when we did her sample, she had to be pulled away from the meter after 45 seconds because she complained about an increasingly severe headache. And here you see a phenomenon called rouleau, where the red blood cells are stacking up. which makes it very difficult for the blood to deliver oxygen to the tissues as they would be their normal function. Every single one of these is a degradation. Every single one of these shows a trauma to the blood cells, and that came from something, and the only variable was the smart meter. The good news in all this is the patient and the blood can return to normal once they have been removed from the influences of these stressors.
Some of the effects that we can look at, well, one thing is just our regular Wi-Fi, 2.4 gigahertz. That's in the same range as microwave ovens, which are also called radar ranges, because that is radar. 2.4 gigahertz is interesting. It's not the peak absorption rate in water for microwave frequencies, but it's at a point where it allows full penetration, because if it came in at the peak, it would prevent the insides from getting warm. So that's with basic Wi-Fi. Now when we look at 5G, 60 gigahertz, this is what they call active dispersal sort of weaponry, just to keep people back. It burns the skin. It doesn't penetrate, but 60 gigahertz is the frequency of oxygen molecule absorption. Since they have electrons that they share with each other, what we breathe is actually O2, pair of oxygen. So being bombarded with 60 gigahertz could very well impair our oxygen absorption rate in our body, and thereby the whole basis of our living system. Martin Pall says, putting tens of millions of 5G antennas without a single biological test of safety has to be about the stupidest idea anyone has had in the history of the world. So assessing all this, we have experts in various fields: military EMF weaponry, biological effects on humans, firefighters that are getting cognitive impairment by being there in them, countries that are banning these sort of technologies around schools because of the impairment to cognitive. Let's weigh that up in light of what Rudolf Steiner said in 1924 about just mere radio causing the impairment of cognitive functions on people, that they can receive news from around the world, but they can't understand it as well because of the effect of the electricity. We have to say, something smells sinister here.
With the 5th generation, it's actually a whole new ballgame. It's not using the same technology. They're switching to military-grade millimeter wave technology. And when you look at this technology, I mean, if you go and look at DARPA reports, come and look at some of the patents that the United States military has put out on what they can do with psychological weapons, all sorts of things, crowd control, active denial, anything you can think of, this is what they can do with 5G. So any type of military application you can think of which has an electromagnetic base, they can do with 5G. And they're putting this out blanket across the population.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
The FCC is a capture agency. They probably conducted what I believe to be the biggest fraud on the public ever conducted.
The FCC has been described by Harvard University's Center for Ethics writer Norman Alster as the most captured agency in D.C., acting more as an industry cheerleader than a regulator. This is especially true today with 5G, where there are serious safety concerns and potentially misleading information coming from the FCC.
For example, the previous chairman of the FCC is Tom Wheeler. He was the head of the Wireless Lobby Association for 14 years. Now remember, Obama told us there would be no lobbyists in his administration, so he took the biggest lobby and put him as a head of the FCC.
And that's damn important.
In 1993, the FCC started a rulemaking to adopt the IEEE regulations on this issue. IEEE is an engineer association. Why is it that we adopt regulation of engineers who maybe know how to measure this radiation when it's passing a wall, but not when it's passing a body? All our health agencies objected it, saying that it makes no sense to adopt engineer association, that they had not even one biomedical person on their team.
They're effectively indemnified against adverse health impact lawsuits when the acceptable limits are higher than the limits actually shown to show harmful health effects.
The FCC guidelines were developed for short-term exposures, 6 minutes, 30 minutes, depending on it's a phone or an outdoor exposure. And they have absolutely no connection to the biological effects that have been very clearly summarized in the Bio Initiative.
So as you can see, there's a number of individuals in this room today that have serious concerns about this as regards to their health. If one of your companies decides to put one of these small cells up at a pole that's within, say, 50 feet of one of their houses, what recourse do they have to say, is there a way to move it somewhere else?
There's language in the bill so that the authority can require the applicant to come forth with certification of compliance with the FCC's rules related to radio frequency emission.
Remember that denial of request or denial of permit request that you can put in? It's going to point back to the acceptable levels as determined by the FCC. Not the EPA or not the CDC, the ones who usually take care of health concerns, but by the FCC, which is staffed by former members of the telecommunication industry. That's the fox guarding the hen house.
It's a fact that most insurance companies will not indemnify against EMF effects. Telecom companies around the world are warning their investors of potential major costs due to real or alleged risks of EMF pollution from their products. Interestingly enough, they're warning their investors, but they're not telling their customers. They're basically keeping it quiet because that's where their money comes from. So we're using technology that could be very potentially harmful to us, and the investors know it. But their only worry is that they might lose money, not that our health might be affected.
First of all, I think what you should really think about is why is it that they're not insured? It's not that they chose to be self-insured. They actually rejected by the insurance company from being insured because they understand the risk. And
so the insurance companies, the big insurance companies, will not insure the telecommunication?
So there's insurance companies, and then there's what's called secondary insurance companies. Secondary insurance companies are the insurance companies that insure the insurance companies. So in an event, an insurance company, let's say I insure Verizon, and it may not be able to meet the claims, then the secondary insurance company is kicking in.
Like Lloyd's of London.
Sorry?
Like
yes,
Lloyd's of
exactly.
London.
So two leading one would be Lloyd's of London and Swiss Re. Both told the insurance company not to insure the wireless industry, and this is why they're not insured. And that should give you a hint. Now, this is exactly why they have to prevent a health lawsuit. And how do they prevent lawsuit? That goes back to Section 704. Section 704 was passed in 1996. This is how our rights in regards to health were taken away by the wireless industry. What this legislation did, it gave the power to regulate the health effects of wireless technology to the FCC. FCC is a spectrum auctioning agency. It's not a health agency. They don't even have one biomedical person on their team. And then the other thing that Section 704 did, It actually took the power from the states to regulate location of cell towers based on health. And what does it mean? It means that if they want to put a cell tower in front of your home, you cannot go to a city council and say, hey, stop, I don't want it. I just heard in a lecture that there are 10,000 studies proving that it's harmful. I don't want it. My child is sick. They will tell you, stop. You're not allowed to mention this in the city council because Section 704 says that if you will, and if the application will be rejected, the city will be sued, can be sued by the wireless industry.
A major U.S. government study on rats finds a link between cell phones and cancer.
Very first government study linking the radiation from cell phones to cancer.
Two-decade, $30 million federal study out today found there is some evidence of a link between cell phone radiation and brain cancer.
Professor, what is the NDP? I've heard that study several times. NDP is what?
So it's a $25 million study on rats and mice that was supposed to demonstrate that there were no effects of radiation below thermal. And in fact, it demonstrated exactly the opposite. And it follows on the heels of two major studies on animals that said exactly the same thing.
And that study was designed perfectly to make sure that it cannot be challenged, that there will not be any doubt. That's why it took them 14 years. That's how they prevented discussion of health. And why do they want to prevent discussion of health if there's no problem with health?
Simply put, FCC is completely unprepared, unable, and possibly unwilling to oversee 5G for safety, even as it barrels toward us. They are falling back on tired definitions and panaceas long since disproven by science. To make matters worse, recent FCC rulings and numerous industry-friendly bills passed at state and federal levels between 2016 and 2018 removed the last vestiges of local and state review over infrastructure siting, just when we need it the most.
When those first studies were performed years and years ago, nobody knew about the importance of the microbiome, the role of the microbiome and the immune system, and even less the role of the microbiota inside our brains, that is, the microbes that are normally resident inside our brains, whose influence on brain function is nothing but immense. And you may think, well, who cares about the microbes? The less microbes we have, the better it is. Well, we know by now that this is not absolutely the case, because microbes are truly essential for the development and function of all our organs and systems. Our immune system is based on the microbes we have in our gut. And our brain also has microbes that influence its function.
In tests, it's been found things like mold. If you grow mold inside a Faraday cage, it'll grow one way, and then even if the electromagnetic fields are around, take the Faraday cage away and some sort of 600 biotoxins are developed within the mold because of the effects of the EMFs upon it. Electromagnetic fields, even of weak quality, have an effect upon our microbiome, which is really essential to our whole being.
This is going to eviscerate microbial DNA inside human beings, which is our effective operating system, number one. So it may not impact human DNA in laboratory experiments right now, and they're saying it doesn't impact human DNA. But given that human DNA is less than 1% of the cellular DNA in the human body, the rest of the cellular DNA is microbial, and we know that this will eviscerate microbial DNA. So we're talking about a takedown of the operating system of human beings.
Exactly. I couldn't have put it better myself.
John Brandt.
Good morning, Mr. Brandt. Wow, this is Amanda from Virginia.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, I've been trying to get a hold of you for months now. You guys are covering up chemtrails.
No, we are not covering it. We have no reason to cover up chemtrails.
Of course, you have every reason to cover it up. Every reason. It's called losing your job.
What reasons would that be?
Oh, well, you personally, you would lose your job if you were to reveal anything to me, and it's probably unsafe for you to even be speaking about this, considering the types of individuals you work for.
It's not unsafe.
It is unsafe.
There's no problem with us talking on, you're a citizen, you're making a complaint.
Oh, Lord, have mercy on myself.
It's a complaint in an area that we don't have authority to regulate.
So the connection between chemtrails and 5G.
It's all interconnected. The metallized particulates that would allow the 5G phased array, so basically the radar, that would allow it to be able to identify you, so it can watch you, it can identify you in your own home 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
For the last X amount of years, we've been through chemtrailing, and that is now the cat is out of the box. We've had these nanoparticulates raining down on humanity for years now, impregnating our bodies, by best accounts staying inside our bodies. Those nanoparticulates, what you're saying, are building up a kind of a phosphorescence glow capability so that we can be flagged up in our homes, behind concrete and steel, inside bunkers, in the basement, doesn't matter where you are. The 5G will be able to now triangulate, map and read you because you as a living being are impregnated with these nanoparticulates, which are acting as a kind of transmission and reception technology.
It's exactly, absolutely exactly.
You have to consider that DNA also works as a fractal antenna, which is able to send and receive and also to process signals under the form of radio frequencies. Well, then there is no doubt that artificial radio frequencies, such as those of cell towers, and in particular these new types of towers that have a much higher density of signals, they may somehow interfere with the ability of DNA to retain and transmit biological signals. So this is one level of danger that very few biologists are aware of.
How much effort was put forward to address this, what most of these people are, or many of these people are here for, which are the health concerns? Was there any dialogue back and forth? Was there any working, was there many studies evaluated to look at regarding this area?
Maybe not every person that has concerns on the legislation was brought to the table.
Okay, so from your perspective, you feel that there was a legitimate amount of time to evaluate the data that the opposition would have on this?
Absolutely, and I wouldn't put forth something that I didn't believe in. And I'll tell you, as I mentioned earlier, and it's been commented several times amongst the panel here, this is truly an economic development issue. Our 3-year-old, again at home, is outraged when we pull out the driveway and he's not able to access Wi-Fi.
I think anyone who puts Wi-Fi into a school should be locked up for the rest of their life. I really do. I think they're not fit to walk on the surface of this planet because they haven't looked at the research, and whatever incentive they have, it is not worth the genetic problems that parents are going to face with their children when they're born.
France has banned Wi-Fi in nursery schools and put warnings out for regular schools because they're finding there's impaired learning capacity in children when they're around Wi-Fi. And they have to put up warning signs where they put Wi-Fi transmitters.
When I got sick and I learned that they're putting Wi-Fi in the schools in Israel, I was very sick at the time, but I could not tolerate the thought that children in the schools will become as sick as I have. And after a few months of correspondence, I submitted a Supreme Court case in Israel to ban the use of Wi-Fi in the schools and replace them with wired network. The 4 top diseases that kill our children, our young adults right now, are brain tumors, thyroid cancer, testis cancer, rectal cancer, everywhere we put our cell phones. And a lot of our children are sick and they're being misdiagnosed and mistreated because the wireless industry has put billions and billions of dollars in the past 30 years to mislead the public as to the health effects and keep the public uninformed.
We are performing an experiment on children. We are exposing children to microwave radiation for 6 hours during every school day. We have had absolutely no studies looking at the long-term effects of this radiation on young people or even on adults.
A considerable amount of research shows that developing brains and bodies of children are much more affected than adults. And there are clear indications of a link between increased electromagnetic fields and autism spectrum disorders.
We took 10 autistic children and went back to the sleeping location where the mother was when she was pregnant with that child and compared it with the sleeping location of a mother that gave birth to healthy children. We had 10 mothers in that group, 10 mothers in this group, and in the group of the autistic children, we found that the measurements that we got for the microwave exposure was elevated compared to the group of children that were normal. The fetus is affected. The exposure to man-made electromagnetic fields has become the first factor that could be isolated ever in autism that could predict autism.
The fifth generation of wireless technology, or 5G as it's being rolled out worldwide without safety testing. Let me say that again, without safety testing. And how we've got scientists and doctors and environmental organizers saying, stop this. Because in terms of the effects of wireless radiation, the science is in. Wireless radiation can lead to cancerous heart tumors, brain tumors, DNA damage. Wireless radiation is linked to infertility, to autism, Alzheimer's, and more. And guess what? All the effects that I just listed, those are some of the effects that are known according to the technology that's being seen today.
First of all, you have to know that we know that the other EMFs that we're exposed to are already known to be health risks. And basically that 5G, because of the frequency that's going to be used and because of the extraordinarily high pulsation levels that will be used, is a much bigger threat to our health than the things that we already have, which are very substantial threats to our health. We're not just talking about the intensity. We're talking about the frequency and the very high level of pulsations. There's a huge literature which shows that pulsed EMFs that pulse up and down very rapidly, are in most cases much more biologically active than our non-pulsed EMFs. Every single wireless communication device communicates via pulsations, but the industry completely ignores this issue. The problem with 5G is that they're planning to put out tens of millions of these antennae all over the place without doing one single biological safety test.
Are you implying possibly that we, the consumers, are the guinea pigs since they haven't really done tests to see the effects in a smaller setting?
I mean, that's not an implication, it's a statement. We are, yes.
Cancer is not the main concern that I have. I'm really concerned about sperm count and about effects on pregnancy.
How many of you know that 1 in 6 American couples is unable to have a child when they want to? How many of you know that last year the birth rate in this country dropped the most that it ever has in recent history, 3% in a single year?
People look at the sperm, and people use cell phones, and the sperm, usually sperm swim, and they swim straight. But if you expose them to radio frequency, mobile phone waves, they swim in a circle.
Studies have been done here in Australia, taking sperm from healthy men. And one test tube gets exposed to cell phone radiation, and one test tube is not exposed to mobile phone radiation. And then the results are evaluated. And this is a measure of vitality. We measure how well the sperm swim. This is a measure of motility. This is a measure of mitochondrial DNA damage. They have 3 times as much damage on their DNA if they have been exposed to mobile phone radiation. The data on that are rock solid. Cell phones can damage sperm quantity and quality.
Your embryo, your uterus in the fetus, where your child is developing for the first 100 days, in the ovaries, the eggs do not have that protection. So they are at maximum risk from radiation. And for the first month or so, you wouldn't even know you were pregnant. You wouldn't even be taking precautions. That is the main danger area. So you give birth to a daughter, but her ovaries are now contaminated. She may be normal, she may be genetically damaged, but her ovaries are at the most risk. So when your daughter grows up and she becomes pregnant and has a baby, this is where one of these eggs will be fertilized and come out. So the real damage here is your grandchildren. That is where it is going to show most.
Do you think that there is a chance that within the third generation of females, they may be irreversibly sterile?
Not in the third generation, but in the fifth generation, and that would for humans be something in the order of 150 years ahead of us. And of course, then it's too late to say that you are sorry, and it's very too late to say stop. There is a wealth of papers. I mean, we're talking about thousands of published papers in the scientific literature, few of which, or sometimes none of which, have entered the official documentations from authorities and likewise. So I think it's really time to have an independent compilation of data. Such was done at August 31st, 2007 in the form of the Bioinitiative report, of which I was one of the authors. And then we put together approximately 2,000 scientific references on a little bit more than 600 pages, clearly saying that if you, for instance, if you are a rat or a mouse or a cell or a molecule, you should definitely not allow yourselves to be exposed to this. And in the meantime, we have this full-scale experiment using our own kids.
One interesting case, John Patterson, he was a telecommunications engineer in Sydney, Australia. Very brilliant man.
For 20 years, John tested Telstra digital systems. Over the time, he realised the dangers of electromagnetic radiation.
It disrupts the bioelectric system of your body, which is really your brain, your nervous system, how your muscles talk.
And he tried warning of these effects through different agencies, through his company.
Got all the test gear out and measured it and drew up a report, and I was immediately removed from service.
Finally, in 2007, he took matters into his own hand. He commandeered a used British Army tank and went and destroyed 6 cell phone towers in Sydney, Australia, because he wanted to stop this. He was trying to make a point.
The message was that how dangerous it was.
You know, these people were elected by us to manage our infrastructure in a responsible manner. That is the sole purpose of government if it's going to exist at all. And if it doesn't do that, then it has no right. It is invalid. So we need to pull this infrastructure down. We really do. But in order to do that, I mean, we can't just be some violent domestic terrorist. You've got to bring this awareness to the people that these towers are doing them damage. You don't need bandwidth that fast. And they're not doing it so you can download movies quickly. They're doing it so they can track every single thing you do and bring in this social crediting system to control even everything you think.
There's a story about a lady called Claire Edwards. She was a United Nations staff member, and she was warning of the potentially catastrophic dangers of 5G technology. I took the issue to the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. He is a physicist and electrical engineer, and lectured on telecommunication signals early in his career, yet asserted to me that he knew nothing about the dangers of 5G.
Current public exposure levels are at least 1 quintillion, that's 18 zeros, 1 quintillion times above natural background radiation, according to Professor Olle Johansson of the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. The highly dangerous biological effects of EMFs have been documented by thousands of studies since 1932, indicating that we may be facing a global health catastrophe orders of magnitude worse than those caused by tobacco and cigarettes. 5G is designed to deliver concentrated and focused electromagnetic radiation in excess of 100 times current levels in the same way as do directed energy weapons. There is currently an international appeal signed by 237 EMF scientists from 41 nations, urging the UN and particularly the WHO to exert strong leadership in fostering the development of more protective EMF guidelines, encouraging precautionary measures and educating the public about the considerable health risks, particularly the risks to children and fetal development.
Sorry, because you are talking with someone that is a little bit ignorant on these things. You're talking to the Wi-Fi systems? I become worried because I put those devices in my house. I will have to, I mean, I'm a confess my ignorance on this. We will have to, but I'm going to raise this with WHO, which I think is the organization that might be able to deal with it properly, because I must confess I was not aware of that danger.
In 1996, when the Telecommunications Act was passed, in it was a provision essentially that kept local officials from addressing health issue concerns when approving or not approving a cell tower. So
that's correct.
But then something new is happening. We've talked a lot about it on the Solari report, thanks to Jason Bogdan-Smith and his website EMF Warriors. But this is new. This is very, very new. So you're basically, sending out an appeal on something that in one sense hasn't happened yet. This is not just an incremental change. This is a big step up.
It's a sea change. An onslaught's not an improper word. It's a bombardment. So instead of a cell tower 1 mile or 2 miles from you and you still have cell phone service, we're going to have antennas every block, and some poor soul is going to have one mounted to a utility pole maybe less than 20 meters from their home. So this kind of, invasive bombardment with this many antennas, I mean, just in 1 square mile, if you do the math, 1 per block and 16 blocks per mile, that's about 250 antennas per square mile. The millimeter wave is untested. Former FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler openly said that they don't plan to test.
We won't wait for the standards.
And then our appeal also addresses the fact that there's a plan to roll out 5G through satellites in low Earth orbit. So 20,000 satellites, which will cover every square foot of the planet with a 5G signal.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Night after night, politicians and other leaders were telling Americans that Sputnik revealed that we were at great risk.
Not just our pride, but our security is at stake.
If Russia wins dominance of this completely new area, well, I think the consequences are fairly plain. Probable Soviet world domination.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Welcome, everybody, to the White House. This is White House 5G Summit. My name is Justin Clark. I'm the Director of Public Liaison, and we are thrilled to have you here today. Really happy to be joined by a lot of leaders in industry, members of Congress and the Senate, White House leaders on this, and people from the FCC. Before we start, one, we are government, so don't assume we know anything, okay?
I do agree, I don't know anything.
I have become accustomed to giving speeches in my new position on subjects about which I frankly know very little, and we need more cell towers and connections in Connecticut, my home state. It's ridiculous.
The U.S. is in the lead thanks to our private sector as well as the work of the FCC and this administration overall. China and South Korea and many other countries are eager to claim this mantle.
We have every intention to deploy 5G first and reap the benefits of faster and more robust wireless.
Yes, I hope we beat China, of course.
And get to gigabit speeds and low latency, and the race has begun.
Let there be no mistake. The race to 5G is a sprint. Winning the global race to 5G, it's a national priority. We must bear in mind the national security implications of winning the race on 5G.
Today we're talking about the importance of being first in 5G, continued commitment to putting America first in the race to 5G.
We're calling it America First, 5G First.
Well, our strategy is called the 5G FAST Plan, a plan to facilitate America's superiority in 5G technology.
Connected devices for health applications, which I love, has the capacity to make people healthier, as I understand it, a lot of medical applications.
Industry is not asking the government for money to build 5G networks. They're asking us to cut the red tape that surrounds infrastructure deployment.
We cannot let today's red tape strangle the 5G future.
The red tape slows and sometimes stops the building of densified network facilities necessary for 5G.
As we continue our efforts to keep government out of the way so that America can continue its leadership for America to win the race to 5G.
One path is the government regulatory path. The other path is the private enterprise, free market, gales of creative destruction, Schumpeter path. You ever heard that? Gales of creative destruction? It just means let it rip. The new replaces the old.
With 5G, we're on the cusp of another era of American innovation. It means an even more connected world for everyone around us, unlocking the potential of the Internet of Things to become safer, healthier, and more sustainable for our future.
You know, sometimes, look, we all believe in the 10th Amendment, but sometimes you have to override it. By the way, the 1996 bill permits that kind of override. We're not here to be completely heavy-handed, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And some of these states or cities that don't want to cooperate want to shake us down. We can't allow obstacles and barriers to stop this movement. That's all.
And this happened in Canada. I mean, there were some activists I was working with up there that said, well, you know, we won a victory. We got the Public Utilities Commission to allow us to opt out. And I said, boy, that's divide and conquer. They just got rid of the people that were raising hell. So, you know, that's not the answer. We need to opt out everybody.
An opt-out is an agreement to pay to not be harmed. An opt-out is volunteering into extortion. An opt-out says that if I don't pay you, you have the right to harm me. So that doesn't work.
This is a mandate. This is being pushed down your throat by a company that is not responsive, by a government that is not responsible, and it's being done in a collusion that's designed to undermine the individual rights of individual people and communities across the country and around the world.
The Minister for the Environment has a duty. His duty is primarily to ensure that there is cleaner, better, healthier environment for people in this country. It's a simple duty. He also has a responsibility in regard to science and innovation to make sure that that happens. What seems to be happening here, in fact one could say undoubtedly happening here, is he's using science and innovation to ensure that our right to life is threatened. There have been no public debates. There is no public discourse. There are no public disclosures as to why, when, how, what is going on in regard to 5G. That by itself is a breach of ministerial responsibility, and one which we really should look at in terms of a private prosecution against the ministers who have failed to protect our right to life.
Okay, smart technology, smart meters, smart cars, not that smart, huh? What does smart mean?
Anything that has smart attached to it, secret militarised armaments in residential technology. That's where smart came from. And smart, every bit of technology that you see today has all been developed for either some type of battlefield, some type of intelligence gathering system, and obviously these developments have to be commercialised, and people have actually took them into their homes.
The definition of a smart grid is a wireless system that will fundamentally turn every single appliance in your home into the equivalent of a transmitting cell phone. That's every computer, every television, every furnace, every air conditioner, every coffee machine, every printer, every single appliance that you have in your house will eventually, in a smart grid, have an antenna that's embedded into it that will transmit your usage data to a smart meter on the outside of your home that will then transmit your usage data to another tower receiving a usage signal that will then go to the utility company for supposedly billing purposes. Not all signals will just be about your individual use. There will be aggregate meters that will bounce signal from house to house to house within a neighborhood that will then accumulate all of the usage data that will transmit that to the utility company. Now, what that will do is that the end metering system that is transmitting all of that data will be firing an RF signal at many, many times a second, which will increase the average homeowner's radio frequency radiation exposure exponentially.
This picture shows some aphids on the leaf of an orange tree shortly after radar equipment was installed at a nearby airport a number of years ago. I noticed that every few seconds all the aphids would tense up in unison and do sort of a little dance, as you see in the picture. Upon further investigation, I found that the interval of time between the activity of each dance coincided exactly with the rotation of the radar rotor device at the airport, which was a distance of approximately 14 miles.
The antenna arrays create this steerable beam, which helps concentrate the energy. The beams get pointed at the user.
What's a MIMO tank?
Massive in, massive out. British government have got a plan to roll 400,000 out. This is so that you've got 5G in every nook and cranny, every part of the countryside, so that you can have autonomous tractors, believe it or not. However, those transmitters, these are radar. It is phased array radar. Though that radar signal sweeping the countryside will kill every pollinator, every biological structure, it will sterilise livestock, it will kill the ground, so consequently land won't have a value, obviously farmers will die, the community will be under attack. If we can't produce food, if we kill all the pollinators, we're in serious trouble.
The takeaway is that 5G, the $1 trillion rollout of 5G by our friendly local government, is definitely a weapon system masquerading as a modern efficiency technology.
It most certainly is, and what I put it down to, it's economic terrorism. There is no value, nil, in killing off your population, in destroying your ability to grow food, to kill all your pollinators. They may have a nice financial number on a piece of paper, but in reality, dementia, diabetes, all the things that are currently crippling the NHS, a burden on the country, illness, mental health issues, the focus of that cause can be identified and has been identified in the science. The science is proven. The epidemiological data that we're seeing on the street is now substantiating that science.
The DNA inside you, the mitochondrial DNA, you can trace unchanged to your mother, her mother, her mother, right the way back to the beginning of the human race in Africa, the Stone Age. It is unchanged, the mitochondria, and that is being unchanged in your children, which means if you damage it, your child could be genetically damaged, then her child, and her child, and her child, forever. You are condemning the future generations of every single child.
There is, however, a light at the end of the tunnel, or there is some ray of hope. Thanks to the principles of biological quantum entanglement that we have learned how to exploit in the field of biology and medicine, now we can transfer the information from the microbial DNA to the human DNA. And in so doing, we can train, so to speak, the microbes to withstand whatever extreme condition they are exposed to, including this new technology. And then we can train them to transfer this resilience of theirs to our DNA. So let's say that there are good reasons to be worried about the introduction of these new technologies, but fortunately, since the knowledge in the field of quantum biology, in the field of microbiome medicine is advancing as fast as potentially harmful technology, then we can exploit this knowledge to protect ourselves from any real potential or perceived danger from these new technologies.
I've met with molecular and cellular biologists, with blood microscopists, with weapons development experts, frontline activists and researchers, and all the stories I'm hearing from these experts and pundits leads to the same thing. 5G is almost certainly the end game. It is an extinction event brought into our homes, into our classrooms, onto the high street, into the very cells and DNA in our human bodies. It is such a perilous threat that it is almost impossible to imagine, let alone describe. When the 5G signature goes live, it will tap into a multitude of satellites which are in geosat orbit around the surface of the Earth. Millions of surface antennas will pick up that signaling and will then scatter the signaling into hundreds and hundreds of millions of different micro antenna systems set up on street lamps and even in your home, which you're not aware of incidentally. The LED light bulbs in your home invariably contain the micro or nanotech lens flare capacitors which will receive the 5G signaling, and it will proliferate the 5G signaling everywhere by exploding the signal into billions of photons which will target everything all at the same time. This is stealth technology. This is invisible science. But what it means in simple terms is that you will be flagged up, visible, trackable inside your own home. Anywhere you move on the surface of the Earth, they will have a lock and load tracking capability over you. You will be visible to invisible masters, each one of us, all the time. Today, our governments and the corporate sector have managed somehow to infiltrate the mainframe of our civilization and are pushing through a $20 trillion infrastructural rollout without any, and I mean without any, health science running behind it. There have been no tests. Your government and your health authorities are either in collusion on this matter.
We thank you for watching this video and ask you to spread the news. Put this video on your social network or link to it so that you can be part of the anonymous movement. Together we are strong. Together we are anonymous.